Welcome into the show, everyone. Today, I am here with Ari Sussman of Whiskey JYPSI. He is not a celebrity. He's a former academic, the former head of spirits development at Michigan State University, and a man who approaches whiskey not necessarily as tradition, but as a chemistry experiment. He calls himself a whiskey maker because he doesn't just distill, he deconstructs. He builds his whiskey backwards. Instead of cooking grains together, he sources rare, fully aged spirits from around the world, Canadian rye, Indian single malts, Tennessee bourbons, and blends that reconstruct flavors that a single distillery could never achieve. It is a philosophy that has paid off. His work recently earned the brand the title of 2024 Whiskey Maker of the Year, and his latest release, The Declaration, featuring a historic collaboration with George Washington's Mount Vernon Distillery. He is the quote-unquote mad scientist behind the outsiders. Please welcome Ari Sussman. Welcome to the show, Ari. How are you?
I'm very well. That was a very generous and kind introduction. Thank you.
Oh, man, I'm happy to have you on and get to know more about you, your product, and your journey to get here where you are with Whiskey JYPSI. So let everyone here know where you're from and how you got started with the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Ari Sussman. I'm a whiskey maker. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is not necessarily a place that a ton of people associate with whiskey or American whiskey or bourbon. But I grew up here and I still live here, and I found that it's been a wonderful place to have sort of as a home base for my whiskey journey. I'll say just kind of briefly that I think my approach to whiskey started very young, even before beverage alcohol was a thing in my life. I grew up in a family, a very culinary family, lots of shared meals with large extended family, and whether it was a religious celebration or a birthday or just Friday night dinner, we did a lot of cooking together, um, and we felt kind of imbued with the idea that food and beverage can be um, a medium of telling stories and of constructing narratives. And that was just kind of the food environment that I grew in, where people were growing food and doing old family recipes and comparing different types of tomatoes and stuff. And so that was kind of my approach to food. Fast forward, I had no idea what I wanted to do in life. I thought I was going to be like a political operative. I for college,
Operative?
I worked at the state capitol. Yeah, just someone who's kind of operating in the political sphere, just kind of as a
Mm.
policy analyst or something. So policy analysis was kind of a passion of mine until I got a job at the state capitol, and I realized that I didn't. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel like I was where I ought to be, and I had no idea what I wanted to do or really what skills I had. Um, so I took that as an opportunity to kind of shuffle the deck, and I moved to France without much of a job. I had an opportunity to help a buddy's grandmother at her bed and breakfast, but it didn't pay enough for me to necessarily live. So I needed to, when I got to France, I needed a job, and was able to get a little bit of a job, getting cash under the table, working at the local vineyard. And as kind of depressing and kind of out of sync as I felt working in the state capitol, I found that working in the fields, working the harvest and prepping the vines for harvest and cleaning out the winemaking facility. And this was not a fancy place. This is in southwestern rural France, table wine, nothing too romantic about it. I just fell in love with it. I loved the idea of working in the fields and making something from scratch and cultivating grapes in the ground and then picking them and then converting them into wine. It really struck me. And when I came back to the States, I was bartending, basically so that I could enjoy wines that I couldn't otherwise afford,
Mhm.
and to learn more about hospitality. And during that time, I got into spirits and cocktails. And I was thinking a lot about the similarities between wine, or the similarities and differences between wine and cocktails. And ultimately, I made my way up to Michigan State University, where Dr. Chris Berglund had founded the first distilling program. And I said, I'm a winemaker and a bartender, and I want to recreate bunch of old spirits that haven't existed in a long time that I think my bartender friends would really enjoy making pre-prohibition cocktails out of. And after a long talk with Dr. Berglund, who founded the distilling program, he kind of made it clear that they had a lot of PhDs and chemists and food scientists, but they didn't really have anyone in-house that knew much about the beverage alcohol industry and trends and what people were interested in. So I found myself there at right place at right time and got hired to work on product development at Michigan State because of my background as a bartender and a winemaker.
That's awesome. What were the trends and everything that were super popular? Just out of curiosity during
Yeah,
that
yeah,
time.
no, absolutely. Well, I mean, the cocktail scene was really popping. There were, craft cocktail bars all over the place, and
Mhm.
it seemed like every couple of months someone was writing a new book about some historic cocktail, cocktail theme or cocktail book, or people were reissuing cocktail books from the 1880s and trying to recreate old punch recipes. Punches predated cocktails, and a lot of bartenders were looking into archives for inspiration. Um, and I thought it would be fun to make some of these old spirits that hadn't existed in a long time, not just you know uh, pre-prohibition styles of absinthe, but creme de violette. And old types of gin that haven't been made in the United States since prior to prohibition, um, and there seemed to be a market for that. I mean, brands like Saint Germain were beginning to take off or had taken off, and it was clear that that was bartender driven. So there's a big opportunity to develop new products, new character and spirits for the bartending set, and that's kind of how I got involved.
That's awesome. Early on, what did you develop first before, or was it right to whiskey?
Well, at Michigan State, we worked with dozens and dozens, actually hundreds of craft distillers and farm distilleries, and later some very large distilleries. And we were developing entire portfolios. So at the beginning of the craft spirit scene, so in 2012, 2013, um, in general, craft distilleries, they'd want a whiskey, right? But you make a whiskey, you have to wait quite a long time for it to become mature. You can try to put it in a small barrel and get the wood extraction to happen faster because smaller barrels have more surface area to volume ratio than
Mhm.
big barrels, so they extract more quickly. But it's difficult oftentimes to get those whiskeys into some kind of like reasonable balance. So in general, we develop a whiskey or several whiskeys for a brand, oftentimes using local grain that they would ship in. But people also wanted a gin and a vodka and other products that they could make and turn into cash faster than whiskey.
Fair.
So it was it was liqueurs and um, brandies and gins, vodkas, anything you can think of, rum.
Mm, This all sounds delicious. Um,
Yeah.
well, with your time and the year spent in Michigan State, obviously in the vineyards, do you did you approach everything, or do you consider yourself more of a scientist or creative, so to speak, when you're
Yeah,
approaching
I don't
everything?
actually. Yeah, I actually don't really consider myself a scientist, in large part because I worked with so many actual scientists that had been
Mhm.
trained for 8, 12 years in science, and I came to essentially a laboratory grade production distillery with a completely different skill set than everyone else who was there. And I was able to learn from them. And over the course of half a decade of working there, I was able to really kind of understand what was happening under the hood of the car. Um, but no, my perspective, when I arrived in the spirits industry, I, I assumed that distillers were sort of like winemakers. Winemakers talk about the varietal of the grape. We understand as winemakers and as wine consumers that Pinot Noir and Cabernet kind of look the same, but act very differently in the bottle and in the fermentation tank. That Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc might look the same, but they really function very differently. And the same grape can express very differently if it's grown in two different places in the world, right? I assumed that distillers knew and revered their ingredients in the same way that winemakers do.
Mm.
I assumed that distillers could tell you what varietal of rye, or what varietal of corn, or what varietal of barley they were using um, in their whiskeys because that was normal in winemaking. And a winemaker wouldn't not know the varietal of grape that they were putting in their wine. They wouldn't, you know, they would make it a point of understanding where it was grown. But none of that seemed relevant to whiskey makers. They just had a different perspective. And I didn't really understand it. And and the whiskey blenders in general, were trying to. So that was on the distilling side. It was kind of baffled that distillers weren't obsessive about the inputs, the grains that they were putting into their beverage. And equally, it occurred to me that the consumers weren't really asking that question in the same way that wine consumers were.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting, and I kind of parked that away. And it's actually been kind of a thing I've been working on for 15 years now. Um, and similarly, whiskey blenders were kind of acting like bartenders, constructing cocktails. They were blending different finished components to try to create something that was greater than the sum of its parts. But in general, whiskey makers, particularly at the big distilleries, were trying to sort of sand off the rough edges and bring everything back to the mainstream middle, to create something that's consistent over time. Of course, most wines, or I should say many wines, are vintage dated, right? There's a year, and the expectation is that 1 year's vintage is going to be different than another year's vintage. And that's a feature, right? That is not a bug. But the American whiskey industry is far more commoditized than that. And we don't talk about things like vintage, in large part because the American whiskey industry is very disconnected from agriculture. And so, yeah, lots of was exploring the similarities and differences in winemaking and bartending and whiskey making.
That's I actually did not think of the fact or the idea that whiskey makers weren't as consumed with the process necessarily of like knowing exactly where everything was coming from, and it's very specific and all that comparatively to winemakers. That makes a lot more sense. That makes a lot of sense, and I do appreciate the fact that we don't really consider vintage. Yeah, there's an age statement that people uh, almost treat synonymously with like value, but not necessarily vintage and expecting difference. Yeah, there's a lot. That's a lot there, man. I actually think that's really interesting and a fun like a unique approach. Didn't think of all of that at all. So thank you for that insight.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's fine. I mean, there's a large marketing industry
Mhm.
that kind of encourages whiskey consumers to think about other things,
Yeah.
like mash bill and age statement, which are far less significant than yeah, which are made to be significant when they're actually not nearly as significant as things like grain variety or yeast strain.
We've actually had that conversation on the show a couple of times with some of our whiskey makers. Well, master distillers is just I've always, especially when I'm introducing friends into whiskey, I tell them that the age statement does not matter as much as you think. And there's also like a certain nuance, like flavors are, you're only going to get so much out of so much like cost versus value. It's like there's a lot of bottles that I would put ahead of this high dollar cost and age 18, 21 years and all that. And I will have that argument until I'm blue in the face.
One of the similarities, one of the great similarities between the wine industry and the spirits industry is that there is no correlation between cost and quality. And so there's really expensive wines that are totally mid, and there's really expensive whiskeys that it's the same. And then there's really great value wines and whiskeys that far exceed anything that's 3, 4, 10 times the price.
Oh, 100% agreed. Especially with, we can get into the whiskey culture thing where everything gets overhyped and inflated because of name and scarcity and all this. Meanwhile, it's still a $65 bottle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's just always interesting to see that. And I'm glad that you said it about wine because I've always kind of had that interpretation of there's a certain level because I'm more into obviously the spirits than necessarily wine. And I've always had that thought was like, this isn't as worth as much as people hype it up to be. That experience isn't as much to me. I rather enjoy a very good bottle for less price with more friends, as opposed to people treating something like the Holy Covenant or something like that hidden on a shelf, a dusty shelf somewhere. It's like, this is made to be enjoyed. And if I feel like there's this monetary value to it, I will be disappointed if I get it. And it's like this.
Yeah, I think listen, that's a huge insight that you just shared, right?
Yeah.
There's no correlation between cost and quality, and it's more important to be drinking with friends,
Yeah.
than if that's what you want to do, than drinking something expensive with folks that you're not close with.
Exactly. Those bottles to show off. But
Yeah.
so with Whiskey Gypsy, you took home Whiskey Maker of the Year from Whiskey Network. When you started this project with Eric Church, did you expect that critics would come around fast to this, or do you think they would approach it with kind of reservations because of a celebrity name attached to it, or did you think this was something that uphill battle, so to speak?
It was definitely an uphill battle. I first of all, it was a great privilege to be interviewed by Raj and Eric, the two co-founders, to be considered for the role of whiskey maker at Whiskey Gypsy, because I know that there were a few other incredibly talented humans whose name was in the hat. Whose name was in the hat,
Mhm.
um, and uh, I was beyond impressed. I've had a lot of conversations with folks with a name that has recognition, who want to get into the spirits world, but don't necessarily uh, want to. They'd like their name on a bottle, and they would like to sell that company for a lot of money, and that's awesome. I mean, that's great. I have no issue with that.
Yeah.
Um, but if the liquid itself is undifferentiated, if the liquid itself isn't expressive in any kind of way, then I'm not particularly interested in being involved. Just because for what, right? So when Eric and Raj said that, as both of them really love whiskey, that they were investing their own money in the company. This wasn't a licensing deal with a celebrity. This was a celebrity that loves whiskey so much that he created a company and bankrolled it himself with his friend Raj, 50-50 partners.
Mhm.
Um, I said, these guys are, and that they wanted to break rules, and they wanted to break rules in the service of quality, not just to break rules.
Mhm.
They didn't want to follow the normal playbook. I thought these guys have some guts, and
Guts wasn't
and
the
and I
word, but
would
yeah.
love to go on this journey with them. Yeah, and I'd love to go on this journey with them because they weren't thinking about whiskey in the typical way, and my approach to whiskey is atypical. So I thought that this could be a really fun experience.
That's awesome. Speaking of the atypical way, right? So you talk about the cross category blending. Could you explain,
Yeah.
first of all, that what that is to those at home who might be novices and not necessarily know that process, and just most bourbons, what they typically go for doesn't necessarily follow this. You're the expert. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, so cross-category blending, that's obviously it's about whiskey blending. It's about uh, combining different finished whiskeys
Mhm.
that would otherwise be completely uh, worthy of going in their own bottle.
Mhm.
But maybe, they're like superlative whiskeys, great spirits in and of themselves, but interested in seeing how they interact with one another. Can they create a blended spirit that elevates them both, right? Um, and it's not uncommon. Some of the best whiskeys in the entire world are blended. Johnny Walker, which is one of my favorites, is a blended whiskey. All cognac is blended, right? You can do things with blends that you could never do with a single source distillery. You can achieve levels of depth and complexity and layering in a blend that you could never get if you were just using whiskeys from a single distillery. Um, and the idea of blending different categories or different types of whiskeys together, blending rye with corn whiskey, blending bourbon with single malt, putting different styles of whiskey together. You know, from a pure traditional whiskey point of view, it's not done. You wouldn't blend a bourbon with a different spirit. You wouldn't blend a single malt with a different spirit. They're supposed to stay in their own lanes. But that's not how bartenders think.
Oh.
For hundreds of years, bartenders, whether they're making fish house punch or early, Sazerac cocktails, are blending different base spirits together to achieve complexity in in a cocktail glass. So I was just bringing a bartender's perspective to instead of a cocktail shaker, a much larger blending vessel. But it's just bartending techniques that weren't really being employed in the spirits industry. Just kind of doing it at a slightly larger scale. Um, the idea to do the cross category blending actually came from listening to Eric's music. I was not familiar with Eric Church's music when we had our initial conversation. Um, I could have maybe named a song. Um, I knew the song Springsteen. I didn't know that it was him
Okay.
because it's
I was
just
going to ask
out
you
of the
what was the
loop.
song. Yeah.
I knew the song Springsteen because I'm a huge Springsteen fan, but I didn't put two and two together. But after I had that initial conversation with him on the phone, and I understood that he was truly not only passionate about whiskey, but that he understood that just like his songs can tell stories that people connect with, he understood that whiskey can tell stories in their own. Whiskey has its own vocabulary. Whiskey is its own canvas on which we can communicate, just like music is. Um, when he sort of articulated that he understood that whiskey could do that, even if people weren't doing that. He had an inkling that whiskey could tell stories that would be meaningful to people. that I went home and listened to I went home and listened to all of his albums kind of in my cozy chair with my good headphones.
You want to
And I
do
realized that this
the
guy, he
research?
sounded like, yeah, it was research exactly with a glass of whiskey. Um, I realized that his music was drawn from all these different traditions. And I heard everything from traditional country like Hank Williams and Johnny Cash, but he also had elements of hip hop,
Mhm.
um, elements of stadium rock, arena rock, sort of 80s stuff. I heard a lot of like the band.
Yeah.
Um, and Eric's also a poet, right? And he had these old Scotch Irish kind of melodies kind of woven into it, and some Otis Redding. I was like, this is a man who knows how to make a country music style by weaving together all these various musical traditions. What would be a whiskey that would kind of make an American style of whiskey by weaving together different whiskey traditions?
Mhm.
And that's how we stumbled upon the idea of this cross category blending, was by thinking, a lot of American whiskey, for better or for worse, is defined by the mash bill,
Yep.
right? Uh, and we have these kind of established mash bills, these kind of commodity mash bills, 21% rye bourbon, 36% rye bourbon. There's historic mash bills that haven't been made in a long time.
Mhm.
Um, and those mash bills, you have a certain proportion of corn, you have a certain proportion of rye, you have a certain proportion of single malt in the mash, which you then distill, turns into whiskey. So it'd be fun to make a blend that used those established proportions, but then went out in the world and found the right corn-based spirit, rye-based spirit, malt-based spirit. Really fantastic representations of what these grains can do in a finished spirit. And
Mhm.
then the idea was to, in the proportions of the mash bill, create the blending bill. So 30% 12-year-old corn whiskey blended with, say, 21, 60% corn whiskey with 36% rye whiskey from somewhere, and 4% malt from somewhere. So take these kind of traditional mash bills and deconstruct them by finding really great spirits that represent those grains and blend them into the proportions. Now, usually whiskey makers do it, usually blenders do it the other way. You start with a certain number of specific ingredients and you blend them to proportion to find the right proportion of those spirits. We flipped that on its head. We decided, let's start with the proportions. Let's start with these traditional mash bill proportions, and then go out in the world, find 10 different types of corn whiskey, 10 different types of rye whiskey, 10 different types of single malt, and let's make a lot of prototypes. And instead of experimenting with the ratios, we kept the ratios constant and experimented with the different combinations of spirits from all over the world, which is flipping blending on its head.
Yeah. That's There's so many things here. So one, I love the fact that you approach this kind of from a bartender's perspective. As you think about like the spirits industry in general, bartenders push a lot of these spirits forward, and having that frame of mind and thought process is the reason why craft cocktails are so successful, right? Finding those ways to put everything together to a beautiful, harmonious combination. So I like that was the approach for building this brand. Definitely something unique. And the fact that Eric Church, to your point, I know maybe one song by him, and there's no offense to him. I'm sure he's a fantastic musician, but if he's approaching music to that way, that lends perfectly. And I will be the first to say that I do often go into things with a grain of salt when I see a celebrity attached to something. I had to do the research to find out that he was attached to this, to make sure that was also refreshing, that it was more about putting the spirit forward and not necessarily focused on him.
Yeah, and that was part of the fun of it. Like, let's
Yeah.
let's take that common perception
I like
that a
that.
celebrity, right? Let's take that. Let's flip that expectation too. Let's confound expectations. Let's
Mhm.
if folks are going to look at a celebrity whiskey and judge it, that's a really fun place to, you can do something with that, right? If
Absolutely.
someone's bringing their own assumptions to a whiskey,
Mhm.
let's surprise them and
Yeah.
let's show them that it's totally fine. We understand how you got that uh, perspective. Over and over again, you see celebrities attach their name to something as a quick money grab, and very rarely, although there are certainly
Of
instances where
course. Of course.
celebrities are doing beautiful things with spirits.
100%.
Um, but let's try to take it even further, and let's take that kind of celebrity, let's take the celebrity and use it to hopefully inject ideas and perspectives into an otherwise pretty homogenous industry.
And honestly, it was interesting online finding out all the accolades and how you are highly rated. You're a very highly rated spirit online everywhere I looked. And Laura hasn't led me down a wrong path, bringing anyone on here that wasn't putting forward a fantastic product. So I'm looking forward to trying the declaration with
Yeah.
the day. For that, actually, on that topic for declaration, Legacy 003, use barrels from George Washington's Mount Vernon. That's hollow ground in American whiskey. Was there pressure with handling that? Was there like, hey, I need to make sure this is a hit. This is 100% one of the best things I've ever put forward. Handling sort of that's historically connected to a founding father, or was that just this is going to be fun? How was that?
You know, it's hard to know if something's going to be a hit. It's hard to know if someone's going to appreciate something that hasn't been done before. You know, if we wanted a hit, if that were the goal,
Mm-hmm.
we know how to do a hit.
Yeah.
It's formulaic,
Yeah.
right? You know how to get on the top 10 list. You know how to make it for the mainstream middle. We know
Cookie
we
cutter.
know what that looks like. We that's not a challenge, right? And that's not particularly. It's just not a challenge because you get a really good old whiskey, right? And you blend it to kind of taste like other award winners that other people like. We're kind of experimenting in new ground here with this cross category blending. We knew that we wanted to do something for the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence,
Tell us some
right?
story. Yeah.
We knew we wanted to do something
Mhm.
and started reading about what kind of whiskey was being drunk 250 years ago. You learn very quickly that, you know, one of the largest distillers in the country was George Washington. By the time he died, he was the biggest distiller in the country, probably.
All right.
And yeah, and he made apple brandy and peach brandy, and he made a style of rye that doesn't exist that doesn't really exist or is not as popular as it was 200 plus years ago, called Maryland style rye. So before bourbon, there
Mhm.
was rye, right? Bourbon didn't exist during the Revolution. Rye did.
Mhm.
Rye was the whiskey of the Revolution. Rum was, arguably the main spirit, but rye was the whiskey of the Revolution. And George Washington made a Maryland style rye at Mount Vernon. A Maryland style rye was a mash bill of 60% rye, 30% corn,
Mhm.
10% malted barley.
Mhm.
So we thought it would be fun for the 250th anniversary legacy edition, which we knew we wanted to call the Declaration because we were doing something different. We thought it'd be fun to start with this old historic Maryland style rye mash bill and then find the right spirits to go in it. So we started 60% rye. We made a blend of ryes that between 8 and 12 years old. The 8-year-old has more of the grain character that we love. The 12-year-old has more of that wood depth. We found a balance between the two that, in and of itself, was one of the great rye whiskeys I've ever tasted. Just the rye component.
Okay.
And then for the 30% corn, we used a 20 to 25-year-old corn whiskey from Canada that we aged in new American oak casks in Nashville for 2 years. Gave it a ton of character and color and aroma. And then the last piece of the puzzle. So we knew that those were going to be 90% of the blend. And then we went looking for single malt, and we tried so many different single malts to be 10% of the blend. Um, Created prototypes with a lot of different single malts that were available, and we ended up in a blind tasting deciding that the 8.5-year-old single malt from Virginia was going to be the right one for this blend. So we have a rye whiskey from Indiana, a corn whiskey from Canada, a single malt whiskey from Virginia, and then we shared this idea of what we were doing with our friends at George Washington's distillery at Mount Vernon, which I don't know if you've ever been there, but they don't have electricity. They're the only distillery that
What?
uses buckets. They use buckets. They use a grain, a mill that's powered by the stream
Mhm.
to grind the grain. They make whiskey the way George Washington made whiskey. The stills are heated with wood fire,
Mhm.
um, and there's nothing about it that kind of reeks of contemporary commodity whiskey production. We told them what we were doing. They said, "We've got these really beautiful apple brandy casks we were about to harvest. Would you like them? Would you like those?" And I was trying to figure out how we were going to create the top note. I encourage all whiskey blenders to study perfumery. That is how you will learn how to stack. I encourage all bartenders to study perfumery. You will learn how to create depth and nuance that spirits alone may or may not teach you. But we knew that we needed like an aromatic top note, and out came George Washington's distillery offering us apple brandy barrels to finish this whiskey in, and that also tied the concept of rye being, we want to do a George Washington, we want to do a Maryland style rye because of George Washington. That ties that historic concept to the now, to
Yeah.
right now, because they were our collaborators on this. So it's kind of a very cool link throughout time. Um, Incredibly privileged to their involvement in this product. It just really felt like it tied the whole thing up in a bow.
I think I love one of the reasons why I love whiskey in general is the story and kind of just that path and to make this spirit. And two, I can't wait to try this.
Yeah. So in its cask strength, 115 plus proof,
Okay.
and any one of the components that are in it would be fantastic by itself. With all of them together, you get a kind of layers of complexity that again you couldn't get from a single source distillery, you couldn't get from a single category of spirit. You really need to be able to blend different categories of spirits at different ages with different finishes in the right proportions, I think, to achieve what I hope we've achieved with the declaration.
I'm looking forward to it. I love that whole story. I love how you wrapped it up. I love one. I did not know that he was the largest distiller at that time. That's
Uh,
super interesting fact. And so, you wanted to do this specifically for the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Once it was done, is this something that you wanted to? Hey, we should probably work with them again in the future. Was it just a one and done, or is this something a partner that you want to work with later on?
I don't know. We haven't thought about it too much. We're just thinking about how the collaboration could serve this particular expression.
Mm.
In the future, there are probably other ideas that will come to us.
Mhm.
It's hard to know where ideas come from or why they show up.
Mhm.
Um, but it was certainly open to working with them. It would be a privilege and an honor to work with them again if the right product shows up.
Listen, if you ever need a guinea pig to just try it out, I could give you my mailing address. So before I try that, I do want to also go to you used Indian single malt for batch 002. We rarely see Indian whiskey blended with American bourbon. What specific flavor notes were you chasing in that, or was it just an experiment? Were you looking for something that you couldn't find in Scotland or in American whiskey? What was that? Why did you go that way?
First of all, in the past 3, 4 years, we've become huge fans of Indian single malt.
Okay.
It um, and I don't know if I just didn't have access to it previously, but I have been beyond impressed by the spirits coming out of India, the single malt in particular.
Yeah.
And it's clear that they have figured out how to use their very unique maturation conditions.
Yes.
Hot, humid, very different than Scotland,
Mhm.
right? And the maturation conditions are have major impact on the ultimate character of the spirit, right? If you were to make the same distillate and age part of it in Goa, India, and part of it, you know, in Campbellton or the Highlands of Scotland, that same spirit would, after 5 years, 10 years, yield completely different results. Um, so we fell in love with Indian single malt. We knew that Legacy 2 was going to be a riff on a traditional bourbon high rye, so 60% corn, 36% rye, 4% single malt. And we figured out the corn that we wanted to use because it was beautiful. We figured out the rye, which was 18-year-old Canadian rye finished in port, sherry, and vermouth barrels, right? So it brought a lot of character. And
Vermouth.
then, yeah, yeah, beautiful. Port, sherry, and Italian vermouth barrels. And then we needed to figure out what that 4% single malt was going to be. And we tried single malts from all over the world. And there was this one that, even at 4%, 4.2% of the blend, imparted uh, fig and tobacco and tea and all these characteristics that were completely unlike, and a little bit of smoke, a hint of smoke, imparted all these characteristics that were unlike any of the other many single malts that we tried in the blend. And time after time, it shocked people. That's from India. 10-year-old Indian single malt. Such a thing exists. 10-year-old Indian single malt. But yeah, so legacy at the end of the day was a blend of American corn whiskey, Canadian rye whiskey, and Indian single malt. So a true cross-category international blend.
Yeah, when I was doing that research on that, it surprised me that that blend came together. I'm part of the Orlando Whiskey Society, and we've had Indian single malt more than once. We've actually sourced a couple things, and there's barrel picks and all this stuff, and we've done events here. So we have master distillers fly out, and we work very closely with this local brand /, and they bring in their product. We speak about it. And I've tried it in the past. So when I saw this, I was like, hold on, I've actually had Indian single malt. I do not recall. Unfortunately, I'll do the research. I'll ask Tim and Mike what was the brand that we drank. But it was fantastic. So when I saw this, I was like, hold on, this is not a well-kept secret. Apparently other people know this exists.
Well, what I'll say about it is many of the Indian single malts by themselves are fantastic.
100%.
It becomes really interesting when you blend the Indian single malt with other categories of spirit,
Okay.
because it has its own space in that blend. It kind of asserts itself in a very distinctive way that's different than American single malt, different than Scotch single malt. It has its own character and personality. It has this depth. It has like shadows and depth that I can't really find in many other spirits. A little bit goes a long way.
Yeah.
And while it's great by itself, it can really impact other spirits that might exist might have more of the top notes in the mid range.
Mhm.
You put a little bit of single malt in there. It's kind of like it's like when you use you know when you're painting and you use kind of dabs of black to create shadows and depth. You don't need a lot of that black paint to create the illusion of shadows. A little goes a long way.
Yeah.
So the Indian single malt does a similar thing when blended with bourbon, for instance. It fills in some gaps that bourbon often lacks.
That's very well put. And I also love that you don't need much black to make grays. Like I love that. But it's interesting because there is a misconception, especially for people who don't necessarily know much about spirits, that whiskey's whiskey, all that. And then when you really break down like regions, temperatures, climates, area, regions of grain, where they source everything, the wood that they use, it's often lost on people who don't necessarily understand how these things differentiate. And I often used a very simple analogy of like the water from Brooklyn makes bagels completely different than the water from Florida. And it is the easiest way where I can compare is like if you had a pizza or bagels in New York, you're always going to say it's the best possible.
I'm going to have to borrow that if that's okay with you.
Oh, go ahead. Just tag me. No, but I that's the easiest way I can compare it to people. And when they hear that, it's like, you know what, that makes sense. So you have to understand that there's just different flavor notes. There's different waters. There's different grains. There's different aspects of what the sum of all parts. Right.
And this is common knowledge in the world of wine.
Yeah.
That where something grows is going to impact its character. And, the truth is that the American whiskey scene is commodity grain. It wasn't developed for flavor. It was developed for starch content. Mm-hmm. It's why when you go to Kentucky and you take a tour of a distillery, they say these are the big grain silos. Mm-hmm. What type of grain do you use? I don't know. Where'd you get it? I don't know. Why did you get it?
We have our local source.
Because it's 12 cents per bushel. That's why we got it, because it's a consistent supply of starch. Okay. Then what's the next grain you use? When you're on your bourbon tour, what's the next grain after corn? That's rye. That's the flavoring grain. Mm-hmm. What's the corn for if it's not delivering flavor? Oh, that's where the alcohol comes from. We need a flavoring grain like rye or wheat, mm-hmm. because the corn has very little flavor because it wasn't cultivated for flavor. It wasn't selected for flavor. It was selected because it's an inexpensive source of commodity starch. Mm-hmm. And we rely on these other grains in the mash bill to create character. Of course, a winemaker would say, well, then why would you use a corn that doesn't have character? Why wouldn't you just select a grain the base of your bourbon, why wouldn't you select that on the basis of how it tastes instead of how inexpensive it is?
Yeah.
Right. But Kentucky bourbon is about scale.
Mhm.
It's not about the ingredients. It's about can we produce massive amounts of consistent product? Not can we make the finest product in whatever size it needs to be.
Yeah. You hit on a fantastic point, not on our notes, but about just consumers nowadays. They want something that's unique. We've spoken heavily about transparency and wanting to know what's in your body, but people are also seeking something that's not cookie cutter. People don't want to always go to the exact same thing everywhere they go. There's something to be said about consistency, but those consumers have now kind of changed and evolved where they're looking for something unique. I want a different experience. I want a different spirit. I want a different taste. I don't want to exactly know exactly everything I'm going to have. I want to be surprised. I want to enjoy something different. So with Whiskey JYPSI, you're providing that with all these unique blends that you can't necessarily ever really replicate, right?
Were you a bar? Have you ever been a bartender? Have you
No,
ever pretended bar?
I'm just a
It's
nerd.
the best.
I'm just
It's
a
the
nerd.
best.
I'm a home bartender and a nerd.
Yeah. So bartenders, I hope maybe in retirement we'll all bartend together again. Um, you as a whiskey maker,
Mhm.
when we're constructing ideas for products, Whiskey JYPSI, we have to give the bartenders something to talk about. We have to give them two, three, 4 points about a whiskey that are true,
Mhm.
that elevate the experience of drinking that whiskey, of talking about that whiskey. And luckily, we come into an industry where the competition, particularly the big companies, their product is very good, but there's not much to say because they all use the same grade and the same stills, the same barrels. They only kind of differ in the glass and the label for the most part. Oftentimes, it's difficult to distinguish one American whiskey from the next,
Mhm.
even if they're right next to each other just by smelling and tasting. You can't call it out. Scotland's a little different. You can smell a Scotch and you can have a pretty good idea that it's Lafroig versus a Macallan,
Mhm.
right? Versus the Highland Park. Like you can do that by smelling and tasting. But it's very difficult for American whiskey drinkers, even American whiskey drinkers that have drank for decades, to be able to taste a glass and tell you what it is. And that's because the range of character in American spirits is so narrow because for a long time there were just six companies making essentially undifferentiated product.
Yeah, that's fair. For someone who's a consumer, there's a certain storytelling aspect of everything that I try to consume. I enjoy my craft cocktails. And when I hear that they're using a unique spirit, not necessarily just something you can pull off of a shelf at a local like Walgreens or something so basic, it's so regular. Nothing, there's not a knock on consistency, but there's not as much creativity and fun with that. So I always look for something that's unique and different. It's like, I crafted this spirit from juniper berries from under a tree in Scotland. I was like, wait, what? Why there? And I want to hear about it, and I want to try that to see if there's a difference. But life is short. You should explore and try new things.
Yeah, that's you actually just encapsulated, a lot of what we attempt to do.
Awesome. Well, speaking of exploring, can you explain the Explorer series wood philosophy? You use the wood from you're gonna have to. I'm gonna
Oh,
butcher
I
this.
got it. I got you.
The forest in France. I'm gonna let you pronounce it. Why does a French oak stave behave differently in a bourbon than an American white oak? So,
Great question.
where's the forest? Because I'm gonna butcher that and Tricot.
Yeah. So legacy, like we talked about, is kind of our approach to blending.
Yeah.
Our approach to blending is not blending for consistency over time, it's blending to express, right? Blending to tell a story, blending to tell a story that hope, in a transparent way that's authentic and hopefully people can connect with. Our next product, Explorer, isn't about the blend, it's about the wood. Wood is a main characteristic, a very central characteristic in whiskey.
Ari, I don't mean to cut you
And
off, but I just
yeah,
had your legacy. Can I have this in a giant jug somewhere?
yeah.
It's
Wild.
amazing. Go on. Sorry.
No. I'm glad
I
you
had to tell
enjoyed
you.
it.
Yeah.
We
So,
spent a long time making it. Enjoy it, right? Like take a second, enjoy it. A lot went into it. A lot of people worked on that.
oh,
Um,
sorry. Go
but
on.
Explore is about the wood, just like Legacy is about the blend and doing unique things with blend. A lot of folks take bourbon, a lot of brands take bourbon, finish it with wood from France or the United States, double wood, triple wood. It's great. But just like different grains have different character, just like different varieties of grapes have different character, oak and other species of wood have different character depending on where they're grown. So American oak is different than French oak, but within American oak, there's five different forests or six different forests that act very differently from one another.
Yeah.
In France, there's like nine different forests that produce cooperage for the wine industry, and each one of those forests has different characteristics. Uh, it's not just American oak and French oak. There are these. There's a deeper level there, which is uh, of the five American forests that we did R&D with, we were looking for sweetness, we were looking for roundness, we were looking for caramel, we were looking for a number of things that American oak can provide that French oak can't in general. Uh, in the French oak, we were looking for depth and spice and clove and kind of dark notes, dark chocolate. And we did experiments with staves from nine different forests in France and ended up at the Trançais forest is where we ended up. So the French oak is from the Trançais forest. The American oak is from Appalachia. And that's kind of our approach to American and French oak, which is spend a year doing R&D, spend a year building prototypes of how different oak stands around the world function, and then how do they blend together. And so Explorer comes out of that year of R&D at looking at the influence of different types of American and different types of French oak on bourbon, and then bringing together the ones that we really love.
You have such a tough job, Ari.
Brutal.
It's brutal. It sounds like so much fun and amazing so far, man. This is insanely good. So very fantastic work, man. And I'm not saying it only because you're on the show, because I could just lie. I mean, I wouldn't lie.
To be honest, it's fine.
No, this is
we believe in transparency.
I believe in always being honest with everything we got going, right?
Yeah. Happy that you enjoy it. Hope you get to share it with friends. It's even better with friends.
Yeah, I'm gonna. The moment we're done, I'm gonna go outside and hand Glencairn to my fiance. Just here you go, try this with me.
Hey, congratulations!
Thanks. I do want to also talk about a little bit. So with the Legacy series, we talked a little bit about like value and cost and everything like that. Legacy series, you launched a bottle at a price point of $200, give or take, right? Was that like, where there's nervousness about how people would approach that, a new name, relatively new name, or did you feel, nah, this is it. This is worth every drop of liquid in this?
It was completely insane. Yeah. We had no idea.
I don't want to say it, but yeah, like as a new name.
Had no idea. I mean, nobody's ever. I had never had a cross-category blend for $200 that someone was offering. I had never had a reconstructed
full bill. Experimental kind of deal.
It's an R&D. It's a silly R&D project that a bartender would do. Really? But we went through a lot of prototypes, and we knew that we loved it. And but we also knew that it's possible that the consumer wants something that's simpler, isn't necessarily looking for complexity. In a $200 bottle, they just want a double-digit age statement. I want a 50. If I'm going to spend $200, I'm going to get a 15-year-old bourbon. Totally fine. We wanted to put something out there. Again, Eric and Raj put up their own money to start a company to break the rules to see what happens, which is insane. But they're it's calculated insanity, calculated irrationality.
Yeah.
But I was brought on to do that, to take risks. If I hadn't taken a risk, if we had known that the thing was going to be a banger, then maybe that's a good point. No, but considering the inputs, $200, felt very reasonable, because all of the inputs that go into our legacy products are rare, limited edition. Oftentimes, there's situations where they go for more than $200 a bottle just as that single component without the blend, right? So we wanted to, 20 to 25-year-old corn whiskey, 10-year-old Indian single malt. These sorts of inputs, there's not very much of it in the world, which is why Legacy is so limited edition. We're limited, at this point, not really by market demand as much as there's not enough volume of the inputs that we're looking for. So we make what we can, and then that we'll make another one next year, and we'll see how much we'll be able to make based on the inputs that we select.
At least put one to the side for me. Listen, so for those listening at home, the Legacy series, your high-end limited blends and super aged stocks that are from different countries, part of your art line, right?
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
that's a very unique, fun approach, and I'm actually very curious. I'm gonna have to try some out in real time, and probably not mix it with anything. Just enjoy it as it is.
Yeah, no, it goes great with like Mountain Dew. If you ever want to like, no, I'm just kidding.
I
If you
heard
want to
no,
mix it with Mountain Dew, there's nothing wrong with that.
there's
Diet
no,
Coke's all good.
but if we've talked, I've joked with my listeners. Well, not joked. I told my listeners that originally Mountain Dew was made to be a whiskey mixer, and this
Yeah.
giant rabbit hole. People started writing me. He's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "It wasn't meant to just drink by itself. Try it with
All the
whiskey."
old folk songs, Mountain Dew is moonshine, right? I encourage people to look at old patent medicines.
Yes.
All the
Oh
it's
my god.
where did Dr. Pepper come from? Who was Dr. Pepper? Well, there
Yeah.
was other stuff in Dr. Pepper before you could buy it at the gas station.
Go look up old timey headache relief. I promise you, you would
Yeah, yeah.
you would get a
When
felony
you
now.
hear a child's toothache,
Whiskey.
codeine and whiskey.
Oh yeah, I've
You
seen
know,
those. So with Whiskey Gypsy, the bottle design is intense. It looks like a piece of industrial machinery. How important is that tactical look or tactile heaviness
yeah.
to the experience of drinking the whiskey?
Got a bottle right there. We First of all, the bottle itself is like a decanter, right? It's kind of like a
Yeah,
special piece of art by itself. And
I gotta
Eric
have one of
and
those.
Raj and the entire team, like we wanted every single touch point that someone has with the brand to be really well conceived and executed, whether it's the liquid or the container for the liquid. Um, and so, one of we all love these hand
Do you mind?
hammered.
Do you mind holding it
Yeah,
up, sir?
yeah, sure. We love these hand hammered copper stills, right? In whiskey making, seeing a hand hammered copper still with sort of irregular indentations on it
Mhm.
is an indicator that something was made by hand, as opposed to industrial, right? As opposed to mass produced.
Mhm.
And so we had the idea that we would create sort of a bottle with a very large pedestal. So it's like it's on a stand, it's
It is
standing up
heavy.
very straight. It's heavy, it's
Yeah.
really heavy. It has a big pedestal.
Mhm.
It has this hand hammered look, which in the spirits industry is a nonverbal way of saying made by hand by someone, who's
Yeah.
been, who's been doing it for a minute. And then the other thing is this incredibly deep punt on the bottom.
Mhm.
This is basically the deepest punt that physics will allow. And what it does is it shows you this gradation of color in the whiskey
Oh,
from
yeah.
super light to super dark. And it kind of reminds us of the patina that you get on a still after you've run it a couple times.
Interesting.
So the bottle itself, and it refracts light really beautifully. So the bottle itself is like a gorgeous. I think it's just gorgeous. The entire design team did a phenomenal job, and then we have to figure out the right whiskey to put in it that can stand up to a bottle of such beauty.
That's fair. It's a definitely stands out when have seen it before. I'm like, this is. I like those hefty bottles. I feel like there's worth. I feel like that. I don't know. Synonymous with just it. It stands out, and that's just me personally. I like my
Listen,
rock classes to be heavy too. I like everything to have heft, and it's not a like a. As a bigger dude, I'm also very clumsy and I break things easily. So I'd rather have something that has can resist a little bit of wear and tear. So, and to your
no,
point,
and,
it
and
feels
also
handmade.
we've seen a lot of people turn this online into like an ashtray.
Oh,
Um,
that would make sense.
Eric has got this song. You'll hear it maybe at some point called "Smoke a Little Smoke, Drink a Little Drink."
I do have a
Right?
10-hour drive to Tennessee, so I will probably.
Worth checking out.
Yeah.
Listen, you will be surprised. But I think a lot of people. So smoke a little smoke, drink a little drink. We see a lot of people, put joints in here and just smoke a little smoke, drink a little drink, and it's like
Yeah.
an ashtray. And yeah, great, good for them.
That's awesome. Well, I do want to touch on the outsider angle.
Yeah.
So your parent company is called the Outsider Spirits in the industry that's obsessed with heritage since 1800s dates. Why is being an outsider an advantage in 2026? As someone who likes to break molds and do things my own way, I agree, but it's risky when it's coming to whiskeys and something that people are so grounded in tradition and spirits.
Yeah, well, there's a tradition of being an outsider in American whiskey. There's a tradition of being an outsider in America.
It's fair.
And what I like to say is Eric is an outsider. I think his third album is called The Outsider. or
Mhm.
Outsiders. Maybe his fourth album is called Outsiders. One of his early albums is called Outsiders. So he has been known as an outsider in country music for a while. Raj, our
Mhm.
other co-founder, he was born in India, came to Michigan as a young guy, and ended up being very successful in New York and elsewhere, all over. He's always been an outsider. You know, came here not speaking the language.
Right.
Um, I'm a whiskey maker in Michigan. I'm an outsider. And so the outsider's perspective is absolutely critical because being an outsider allows you to reflect on what people call tradition, that in many cases is just stasis.
Mhm.
It's just inherited wisdom, or sometimes the inability to make things better over time. So having an outsider's perspective is it's like our superpower. We can look at what is considered tradition and say, oftentimes what's considered tradition is some marketing department covering for an accountant who's making the procurement decisions,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to the whiskey makers making the procurement decisions. So I'm not sure that tradition, as far as the American whiskey industry goes, always puts the character of the whiskey above the spreadsheet. And but being an outsider is a way of saying we're going to put quality back on top as opposed to scale. It's not as important that we make 300,000 barrels this year. It's important that those 300,000 barrels at some point of differentiation exist for a reason, aside from, having a bunch of commodity whiskey.
I love it. And to be completely fair, I agree with you. I think that the greatest American tradition is to be the outsider and to pave a new path. Right. If we stayed the exact same, we probably still run around with muskets and and log cabins. So
Mhm.
I do love the name, and I do love
Innovation comes from the outsiders for sure. And
100%.
and tradition oftentimes is just a marketing speak for doing the same damn thing and without even knowing why.
Man, Ari, if we could be the best of friends, if you only knew how, like this is exactly how I think of many things. I think innovation is fantastic, doing something new, different perspectives, and having a fun, exciting approach to something is the spice of life. So definitely worth doing. So I commend you on that. I know, well, I'm sure we're getting the wrap up signal coming up soon, but I do want to ask two questions. I ask everyone this, and I love having fun with this. One is my personal favorite question is what is your deathbed cocktail? Yeah.
That's a great question. Deathbed cocktail. I
Deathbed.
mean, honestly, um, they're all God's children, right?
You love them all equally.
We love them all equally.
uh,
They're all special in their own way at their own
to
time.
give you time to
Uh,
think of it, I had a
I,
friend.
I love a Manhattan. I love a Manhattan. I love
Oh,
an old
traditional
fashioned. I
Manhattan.
go super old school. Um,
Traditional
I,
Manhattan.
I love a Sazerac cocktail.
Got to pick
So
one.
I
Just one.
listen. Okay, I'm going to go with my last cocktail is going to be a Manhattan.
That's a very good choice. That's a
Yeah.
solid choice.
And
Extra
it's
cherry?
also, yeah, and it's not an eccentric choice. It's actually a very middle of the road choice, but it's a perfect cocktail.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's always interesting because you'd be surprised how many people I know that have been in the spirits industry. I've had one guest pick a Bush Light, and he said, "I've been a bartender for like 30 years. I just want a Bush Light. I just want
Yeah,
an easy drink and move on with my day."
yeah,
Okay, so Manhattan, love that, awesome.
yeah.
And last but not least, if you can go back in time and share a dram of the Declaration with George Washington himself at Mount Vernon, what do you think you would say about American whiskey and how it's changed?
I'm going to be honest with you. I would love to share it with George Washington as well as the slaves that were actually making the whiskey, because George Washington wasn't working the stills himself. So if I could sit down with all those guys, including George Washington, and I would want Martha there too. Um,
Martha would be the best one there.
Martha, yeah, exactly. Martha would be the best one there. So, sorry. So Martha, George, his slaves, who we do know their names. I don't have them off the top of my head. I should. What was your question? What would I do with them?
How do you think he would? What do you think he would think of the American whiskey and how it's changed
Oh man,
compared to what he
I
was making?
I mean, at that point, this is 60% of this is Indiana whiskey. I don't even think there was any. Wasn't a ton going on in Indiana at the time. Um, I think he would be surprised how old the components of this whiskey were, because aging whiskey for more than a year or two wasn't necessarily common practice back then.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would just love it. Yeah, that would be a fantastic conversation. And I think, say, why is your whiskey so damn old? It's got a lot of wood on it. My assumption is that 250 years ago, the whiskey had very little wood character relative to what we're used to right now. Of course, we need wood character in our whiskey because the majority of it is made with corn that has very little character. So whether it's from the flavoring grains or the wood, American whiskey really needs wood because the base ingredients have such little flavor.
Fair. Well, Ari, thank you for coming on. Where can people find you? Are there any promotions, anything coming up, any events that you'd like to speak about, or how can people get their hands on Whiskey Gypsy?
Oh man, well, definitely follow us on our socials, Whiskey Gypsy on Facebook, on Instagram, on some of the on LinkedIn, if that's your thing. Um, our team is doing a wonderful job of sharing the things that we're working on with through the socials. We're super transparent. We show people what we're working on kind of in real time. We want them to feel part of these processes and see how products come into the world. So we love sharing all of that with everyone. Totally encourage you to find to follow that. We have a lot of fun projects coming up, like 2026. Follow Whiskey Gypsy. You will be delighted
All right.
by some of the projects that we've got coming up. Collaborations, as well as new approaches to blending,
Anything
blending
you want
with
to preview here?
ingredients. Yeah, you'll see blending with ingredients that people maybe haven't blended before. In the service of developing new characteristics that people haven't enjoyed before. So I think it's going to be a huge, really exciting year for us. If anybody's at the Jim Beam conference, I'll be presenting a paper on using varietal stated grains to make better whiskey at the Beam conference in Lexington at the University of Kentucky in March. Um, yeah, that's about it.
Awesome.
That's where you can find us.
Awesome. Well, Ari, a pleasure having you on the show. And can't wait to try the rest of these bottles with my fiance or just by myself, depending on what's going on.
Yeah.
But big shout out, obviously, for a pleasure speaking with you. And I could probably talk your ear off for another couple of hours, but I'm sure you're a busy man, and loved getting to know you and the brand and your pathway here and the mad scientist approach to it all. So
thank you so much. I would love to talk with you for hours, maybe over a beverage and a cigar, if that's your thing.
I mean, Delaware isn't that far. I mean, Detroit isn't that far, right?
Takeaways. Yeah.
Huh? But you can find us in subscribe, everything with the show. You can find us on socials is at Last Call with Arthur. And if you're enjoying what we're doing, keep an eye out for a lot of upcoming shows. We're going to be featuring Whiskey Gypsy on some of maybe a cocktail, maybe I'll make a Manhattan, depending on what we have on hand, and see how this Deathbed cocktail for Ari holds up. Make sure everyone drinks responsibly, take care of yourself, be good to one another. With everything going on in the world, just be good. Take care, enjoy a drink with someone who matters, or someone who doesn't matter yet, and then you become friends with a stranger. Either way, take care of yourselves, guys, and see you next week. Bye, y'all. Hey, guys, today's episode is brought to you by Burn Termite and Pest Control. I first met Joe Byrne on Full Frontal Nerdy Show and decided to give his company a try. They have been the best pest service I've ever had. From flexible scheduling, attention to detail, fair pricing, and everything you love about a small business, I highly recommend Joe Byrne and Burn Termite and Pest Control. It's a family-owned and operated business with over 30 years of experience in termite and pest. You can reach Burn Termite and Pest Control at 321-297-7985. Once again, 321-297-7985. And let them know Bourbon and Bullshit sent you. Thanks, guys. See you next time.